Right now at customs checkpoints across the United States, something unprecedented is happening. U.S. Customs and Border Protection just announced it will deactivate every single EA tariff code in its system at 12:01 a.m. Tuesday, tomorrow morning. Billions of dollars in trade flowing through the busiest commercial border on Earth will be reclassified overnight under a statute that has never once been used to impose tariffs in the 42 years since it was written. And nobody, not the importers, not the brokers, not the truckers waiting at the Ambassador Bridge, not the customs officers processing the paperwork. Nobody knows exactly how it works because it has never been done before. But this isn't about a customs system update. This is about a president who just lost the most devastating legal battle of his second term, and instead of retreating, reached for a weapon he's never fired, aimed it at every trading partner on Earth, and pulled the trigger without reading the manual. And the first casualty isn't Canada, it's the entire framework of American trade credibility. Let me show you what happened in the last 72 hours that the headlines are burying under legal jargon. Friday, February 20th, the Supreme Court hands down a 6-3 ruling that rips the foundation out from under Trump's entire tariff architecture. Chief Justice Roberts writes the opinion himself. The language is surgical. EA does not authorize the president to impose tariffs, not ambiguous, not conditional. A flat rejection of the legal theory that powered every major trade action of this administration for the past year. The Liberation Day tariffs, the fentanyl tariffs on Canada and Mexico, the reciprocal tariffs on the rest of the world, all of them gone, struck down, declared illegal by the court, that Trump himself reshaped with 3 appointments. And what does Trump do? Does he pause? Does he consult his trade team? Does he call a strategy session? No. He walks to the White House podium, visibly furious, flanked by Commerce Secretary Howard Lutnick and Trade Representative Jamieson Greer, and calls 6 Supreme Court justices, including 2 he personally nominated, a disgrace to the nation. He calls Neil Gorsuch and Amy Coney Barrett an embarrassment. And then within hours, he signs an executive order imposing a brand new 10% global tariff under Section 122 of the Trade Act of 1974. By Saturday morning, he's on Truth Social, raising it to 15%, the absolute legal maximum, before anyone has even published the formal executive order text. Think about the sequence. The highest court in the land tells the President of the United States that he broke the law. His response is to call his own judges' names, grab a different statute off the shelf, and crank it to maximum without waiting for his own customs agency to figure out how to implement it. That's not trade policy. That's a man throwing furniture because someone told him no. Now, here's what makes this moment fundamentally different from anything that has come before in this trade war, and I need you to understand the mechanics because the mechanics are the story. Section 122 of the Trade Act of 1974 was written for a specific purpose: balance of payments crisis, the kind of acute dollar hemorrhage that happens when a country's currency is in free fall and it needs to slam the brakes on imports to stop the bleeding. The United States in February 2026 does not have a balance of payments crisis. The dollar is the world's reserve currency. American Treasury bonds are the most liquid asset on the planet. The trade deficit Trump keeps citing is a structural feature of being the world's dominant economy, not a crisis requiring emergency intervention. Every serious economist in Washington knows this, but Section 122 doesn't require proof. It requires a presidential proclamation. And Trump proclaimed the statute has a kill switch, 150 days. That's the maximum duration without congressional approval. Count forward from February 24th. You land on July 24th. Now hold that date in your mind because it's about to collide with something critical. The CUSMA review opens in July. The most consequential trade negotiation in North American history will begin during the exact window when Trump's replacement tariff weapon self-destructs. Janice Charette, the 2-time clerk of the Privy Council that Mark Carney installed as Canada's chief trade negotiator, doesn't need a calendar to see this. She was appointed specifically because she understands how clocks work in high-stakes negotiations, and the clock just started ticking against the man on the other side of the table. But the damage radiating from Friday's chaos goes far beyond the Canada file, and this is the part of the story that is actively being under-reported. Today, Monday, February 23rd, the European Parliament's trade chief, Bernd Lange, is walking into an emergency meeting to propose freezing the ratification of the Turnberry Agreement. The trade deal the EU struck with the United States last July at Trump's own Gulf resort in Scotland. The deal was supposed to be the crown jewel of Trump's trade diplomacy, proof that tariff pressure works, that countries will bend, that the art of the deal is alive. The EU agreed to eliminate import duties on a range of American agricultural and industrial products. The US agreed to cap tariffs at 15%. Handshakes all around, photo ops on the 18th green, and now the EU Parliament is about to freeze it dead because after Friday, nobody in Brussels knows what the rules are. Long said it himself in a statement that reads like a diplomatic slap. Pure customs chaos on the part of the US government. Nobody can make sense of it anymore, only unanswered questions and growing uncertainty. The European Commission demanded full clarity on what happens next. A deal is a deal, they said. As the United States' largest trading partner, the EU expects the US to honor its commitments. That sentence was carefully constructed. It is a warning written in the passive voice, and the warning is this: if the Section 122 tariffs breach the terms of the Turnberry Agreement, the EU considers the deal broken, not renegotiated, broken. Now think about who is watching this unfold. Every country that negotiated a deal with Trump under the threat of EA tariffs is watching the EU's move today like a hawk. India cut its tariffs and pledged $500 billion in purchases. Japan made concessions. The United Kingdom signed agreements. South Korea opened markets. Vietnam, Brazil, Indonesia, all of them gave something to avoid the EPA hammer. And the Supreme Court just told the world that the hammer was illegal the entire time. Those countries negotiated under duress, gave concessions to end a threat that a court has now declared was never lawful in the first place. Some will honor their deals. Some will quietly look for exits. And every single one of them is recalculating their position because the man who pressured them into these agreements just lost his leverage, panicked, and replaced it with a statute that expires in 5 months. This is where Canada's strategic silence becomes a weapon. Notice what Carney has not done since Friday. He has not held a press conference. He has not posted on social media. He has not called Trump or offered to negotiate. His trade minister, Dominic LeBlanc, released a single measured statement Friday morning saying the ruling reinforces Canada's position that the tariffs were unjustified, and then silence. Deliberate, calculated, suffocating silence. Compare that to Trump. 3 press conferences, multiple Truth Social posts, attacks on his own Supreme Court justices, a tariff rate change announced via social media before the legal paperwork was drafted, a Saturday morning rate hike from 10 to 15% delivered like a tantrum on a phone screen. The contrast is not aesthetic, it is strategic. Carney is letting Trump fill the airwaves with noise while the structural ground shifts beneath him. Every hour of silence from Ottawa is an hour where the EU freezes a deal, where importers calculate refund claims, where Republican strategists run midterm numbers, where the Section 122 clock ticks down another 60 minutes toward July, and the numbers are catastrophic for the White House. The Yale Budget Lab, one of the most rigorous economic forecasting institutions in America, published its analysis Saturday. Under the current tariff regime, the average American household faces a $600 annual cost increase if the Section 122 tariffs expire on schedule. That's the optimistic scenario. If Congress extends them, it climbs to $1,000 on top of what households were already paying. The Congressional Budget Office estimates the unemployment rate will rise by 0.3 percentage points by end of year. Manufacturing, the sector Trump swore these tariffs would save, has continued to hemorrhage jobs. And the EA refund question hanging over the administration is a fiscal time bomb. Over $133 billion collected under a law the Supreme Court just declared unconstitutional. When reporters asked Trump Friday whether consumers would be reimbursed, his answer was revealing: it'll be litigated for the next 2 years. That is not a policy response. That is an admission that the government took your money under false legal pretenses and has no plan to give it back. Democrats are already weaponizing this. Senator Andy Kim, announced legislation to force tariff refunds directly to consumers. California Governor Gavin Newsom called Trump a fraud and a shadow of himself. Illinois Governor J.B. Pritzker pointed to $1,700 per family in tariff costs. And Representative Will Hurd, a Republican, one of 6 who voted against Trump's tariffs 2 weeks ago, posted after the ruling that it underscores the need for Congress to play its proper role in trade policy. He's not alone. The fracture inside the Republican Party on trade is widening by the day, and it's widening 9 months before midterm elections in districts where 60% of voters already oppose the tariff regime. Meanwhile, at 12:01 a.m. tomorrow, the new Section 122 tariffs go live, and the technical implementation is a nightmare that nobody in the media is discussing. Customs brokers across North America are scrambling. The EA tariff codes are being deactivated. New Section 122 codes haven't been fully tested. The exemption structure for customer-compliant goods mirrors the old system on paper, but no one has run real shipments through it yet. There's no precedent, no test environment, no dry run. The busiest commercial border on Earth will attempt to switch tariff regimes overnight, like flipping a light switch in a building where nobody's tested the wiring. RBC Economics estimates that 89% of Canadian exports are CUSMA compliant and should be exempt. But that 11% that isn't compliant just saw its tariff rate jump from 0 to 15% under a statute that's never been implemented for companies shipping non-compliant goods. Tomorrow morning is a live experiment with their cash flow, their margins, and their supply chains. And here's the detail that should concern you most about Canada's position. The Section 232 tariffs, the ones that actually hit Canada hardest, 50% on steel and aluminum, 25% on autos, lumber, copper, those are completely untouched by the Supreme Court ruling. They were imposed under different legislation. They remain in full force. The sectors that matter most to Canadian workers, the automotive plants in Ontario, the steel mills in Hamilton, the lumber operations in British Columbia, they got nothing from Friday's ruling. Zero relief. The tariffs that are destroying Canadian industrial employment are still there, still collecting, still distorting trade, which means Carney's real fight hasn't even started. The CUSMA review is the battlefield, and the terrain just shifted dramatically in his favor. Consider the negotiating position. Trump walks into July with a Supreme Court rebuke on his record, a replacement tariff that either expired that same week or required a congressional vote that no Republican wants to take before midterms, an EU that may have frozen or killed the Turnberry Agreement, potential refund obligations exceeding $100 billion, an economy where food inflation just hit 7.3%, the highest in the G7, coffee prices up nearly 30% year over year, beef up almost 19%, and a public approval rating on cost of living that sits at 30%. Carney walks in with CUSMA compliance shielding 90% of Canadian exports, a defense industrial strategy redirecting hundreds of billions away from American contractors, trade negotiations advancing simultaneously with the EU, China, India, ASEAN, and Mercosur, an invitation to address Australia's parliament next month, a proposed bridge between the EU and the Trans-Pacific Trading Bloc that would create an alternative market of 1.5 billion people and a domestic population where the political mandate for reducing dependence on the United States has never been stronger. That's not a negotiation. That's an asymmetry. And the man who created the asymmetry is the one who thought he could bully his way to a deal. Now, some will say Canada's position isn't as strong as it looks. They'll point to the real pain. GDP contracted by nearly 2% due to tariffs. Canadian food inflation is brutal. Youth unemployment sits at 14.7%. Exports to the U.S. fell 5.8% last year, the steepest decline in a generation. Food bank usage hit record levels. The economy is hurting, and none of Carney's grand strategic architecture feeds a family in Oshawa whose breadwinner just lost a shift at the Stellantis plant. That criticism is fair. The pain is real. But the question isn't whether Canada is hurting. It's whether capitulation would stop the pain. And the last 12 months have answered that question definitively. Countries that rushed to negotiate with Trump under EA pressure, that flew to Mar-a-Lago, that signed deals at golf resorts, they didn't get stability. They got deals that the Supreme Court just vaporized. They got concessions made under a legal framework that turned out to be illegal. India signed a deal worth $500 billion in commitments 2 weeks before the ruling. Indian trade analysts have publicly said they should have waited. If they'd held off 14 days, the leverage that pressured them into concessions would have been struck down by the judiciary. Canada waited, Carney waited, and on Friday, the court vindicated the wait. Trump's State of the Union address is scheduled for Tuesday night. He will stand before Congress 48 hours after the worst legal defeat of his presidency and try to sell the American public on a trade policy that his own Supreme Court just declared unlawful. He will try to frame 15% tariffs as a victory. He will try to frame the chaos as strategy. He will try to frame the scrambling as strength. And behind him in the chamber will sit Republicans who know that every tariff dollar is a campaign ad waiting to be cut against them. Your congressman voted to raise your grocery bill. Your congressman chose Trump's trade war over your family. Pay attention to 3 things this week. First, watch the customs implementation tomorrow. If there are processing delays, shipment holds, or confusion at the border, it confirms that the Section 122 transition was rushed and improvised. Chaos at the border becomes chaos in supply chains, becomes chaos on your grocery store shelf. Second, watch the EU vote today. If the European Parliament freezes the Turnberry Agreement, it signals that Trump's deal-making credibility is collapsing internationally. Every other trade partner who signed under EA pressure will take note. Third, watch what Carney says, or more importantly, doesn't say in the next 48 hours. His silence is not in action. It's a former central banker watching his adversary's position deteriorate in real time and refusing to interrupt the process. The clock is ticking 150 days. Every one of them a step closer to the CUSMA review. Every one of them a reminder that the weapon Trump is wielding has an expiration date printed on the barrel, and the man across the table, the one who ran the Bank of England and the Bank of Canada, the one who spent his career managing crises that other people created, he doesn't need the weapon to expire. He just needs everyone at the table to know it will. Trump wanted to use economic pressure to force Canada into submission. Instead, he forced the Supreme Court to strip his authority, the EU to freeze his signature deal, his own party to fracture on trade, and the global market to question whether any agreement with the United States is worth the paper it's signed on. And the man he calls governor, the one he tried to humiliate at Davos, the one whose invitation to the Board of Peace he revoked on Truth Social like a petty landlord. That man is standing quietly in Ottawa watching the architecture collapse and building the exit while the building burns. If this analysis helped you see what the headlines are missing, subscribe now. Turn on notifications. The customs transition tomorrow, the EU vote today, and the State of the Union Tuesday are all converging in the same 72-hour window. This channel will be tracking every move. Drop a comment and tell me what worries you more, the 150-day countdown, or the fact that the world's largest trading partners are starting to treat American trade deals as temporary documents. I'm watching both, and so should